Okay, to look at the papers readers this morning, we have Dr. Iyobosa Owogiaren. He is the editor, Nation's Capital of This Day. We'll begin with This Day newspaper. ACF wants alleged sexual harassment against Akpabio thoroughly investigated. The Arewa Consultative Forum released a statement demanding an inquiry into the sexual harassment allegation by Senator Natasha Akpoti-Uduaghan against Senate President Godswill Akpabio. ACF is the latest of, of the organizations as well as public figures that have waded into this matter, saying it has negative implications for the national and international image of the Senate. This issue has been a source of embarrassment to the Senate since the story broke last week, and it's interesting how a disagreement over seating arrangement became a topic about sexual harassment, because as was reported by papers, Senator Natasha was not the only one whose seat was reallocated. It's also not uncommon to have seats reassigned in the Senate. So this has really become a very controversial issue and very messy, and not what the country needs now, Dr. Owogiaren.
Yeah, so the ACF statement yesterday came after the former Senate President Bukola Saraki also expressed similar view, and that there should be transparency in the way the matter is investigated. Even though some people try to play it down, believing that it was a personal issue between Natasha and Akpabio. Well, whether we like it or not, Senate President is the embodiment of the National Assembly. He's also the chairman of the National Assembly. So whatever affects Akpabio also affects the National Assembly. And that's why I agree with the ACF that, and the Bukola Saraki, that there should be a thorough investigation over the issues. I think by now, from the comments I'm reading from many people, Akpabio ought to have step aside, just like what happened in the past, so that the House or the Senate can investigate the matter. But I read the statement by the Deputy Chief Whip yesterday, who was trying to play down the whole thing, even accusing Natasha of being a gold diggers or serial liars. Now, if you have that kind of a person, the whole principal officers of the Senate, already convicting Natasha, so of what use would Natasha appear before the Ethics Committee that was set up by the Senate to investigate the matter? It appears some members of the National Assembly, of the Senate, have made up their mind that Natasha is guilty. But I think they will not be fair to her. Like the ACF said, like Saraki said, the former Senate President said, there should be transparencies in the way the matter is conducted. A proper committee should be set up for them for the matter to be investigated and come out with a finding. Because what Natasha said, that was also corroborated by the husband, is that there's a concrete evidence, to back Natasha's allegations, So such thing cannot be, wished away just like that, because some principal officers, do not want the matter to be investigated, or they want to suspend Natasha. So the matter should be properly investigated. I think that's the opinion of many Nigerians.
We also saw the interview by Senator Ireti Kingibe. I mean, Natasha was the first person that came out to grant that interview, and then Senator Ireti Kingibe also granted her own interview, saying her own side of things. I mean, it's just so messy, and we'll wait and see how the Senate handles the entire matter, because it is critical for transparency of the country and the Senate as a body. This is something they do not need. Let's move on to the other story in this day that talks about Rivers State. Fubara will implement Supreme Court verdict, urges calm in Rivers State. We also have that story in the Vanguard this morning. Shall we pull up the Vanguard? Supreme Court judgment, anxiety as Fubara begins implementation. Governor Sim Fubara said he will comply with the judgment after reviewing its certified true copy. The court declared that the local government elections conducted in Rivers on October 5, 2024 is invalid. The court had also ordered the Central Bank of Nigeria and the Accountant General of the Federation to stop the monthly federal allocation to local governments in the state. I mean, such a difficult situation for Governor Sim Fubara. Where does it go from here, really? What's your sense of how this might play out, Dr. Wogiaran?
Well, unfortunately, the highest court in the land has given its verdict, and so the governor has no option than to implement the verdict of the court. As for stopping the federal government agencies from releasing allocation to the Rivers State government, I think it is not a blanket directive. The verdict said, look, stop releasing allocation to Rivers State pending when the governor submit the budget to the State House of Assembly for approval. So if the governor is interested in getting the money from the federal agency, what he needs to do is to resubmit that budget to the State House of Assembly for them to pass it, or for them to scrutinize it and pass it. And until that is done, the Supreme Court said, look, don't release money to the Rivers State government. But I think the whole thing is that now that the Supreme Court has given the verdict, I think that's the last bus stop. Fubara and the former governor of that state, who is now the FCT minister, Nyesom Wike, have a responsibility to ensure that there's peace in that state.
Right.
If their purpose is for the interest of the people of Rivers State, then they have the opportunity now to sit down and see how they can implement that judgment in the general interest of the people of Rivers State, rather than this grandstanding by both of them, because their disagreement is not helping the people of Rivers State who elected them in the first place.
Indeed, it's not helping. Shall we look at Daily Independent and tie this story there? It also talks about Rivers State, where it says that Governor Fubara has ordered fresh local government elections in that state because of this judgment. He has also asked the chairman to hand over power today, Monday. And when you look at, talking about what is in the interest of the state, these two men, FCT Minister Nyesom Wike and Governor Fubara, battling it out, and then now you have to spend doubly to conduct another local government election when you've already done that last year. Charles, I mean, it's just so difficult for the state itself.
Well, there's always a way around everything. At the end of the day, Fubara appoints the local government administrators, interim administrators, to supervise the affairs of the local governments. And then, well, there is no constitutional change at the moment, so the power to reconduct local government elections again in Rivers State still rests with Fubara. Well, he'll have to find a way to raise funds to conduct those elections, and I'm very sure he'll find that way, because Rivers State, being one of the oil-producing states, generates a lot of internally generated revenue. So I'm very sure he should be able to raise funds from that source, reconduct local government elections. So I guess he still is the hand that holds the yam and the knife.
Yeah, it's a waste of public resources, just because two men are fighting.
Well, unfortunately for Rivers State, but well, that's what the court says, and so do we have any other choice?
No, I don't think we do. Then Guardian this morning, the Guardian newspaper, 2025 budget, bloated 41 trillion naira revenue target stokes fresh fiscal deficit concern. There's a detailed breakdown of this report for us to see there in the front page of the paper to actually understand what we're dealing with. It says expenditure is 54.99 trillion naira for the 2025 budget, and then the revenue target is 40.9 trillion naira. Deficit is 13.39 trillion. And debt service, that's a big one, is 14.32 trillion naira. This is a recurrent topic. In the long term, increasing budget deficits and huge sums allocated to debt service, it saddles future generations with debt, and it really limits government's ability to invest in vital public goods and services. So you actually want to rein this in, Dr. Wogiaran?
Absolutely. Deficit means that you don't have a clear means of raising money to service your budget. Recently, we were told by the President, Bola Ahmed Tinubu, that the revenue of the federal government has increased, and that by that, it means that the budget deficit has also reduced. But if you look at the money that the federal government will be spending to service debt, is huge, because if you have a deficit of almost about 14 trillion naira, it means that you are going to borrow more money, to service the budget, and that is where we have issues. I don't know how they're going to solve that, but I think rather than increasing the budget, which the president did recently, should have just leave the budget at that, and so that we can reduce the deficit drastically and find a way to manage the budget in the interest of our economy.
Well, we'll see how that goes. The Punch this morning, LG funding, government agencies brainstorm as direct payment suffer setback. The Attorney General of the Federation and the Accountant General have started talks about direct disbursement to local governments. Currently, there are difficulties with identifying democratic elected officials. I mean, that's a problem all across the states. The Accountant General notes that there are complexities that need to be resolved to have a smooth system. When the LGs can submit their accounts and receive their funds directly. So what we're seeing here is steps are being taken in regard to that Supreme Court judgment last year on local government autonomy, as well as financial autonomy for the local governments. Charles, so we're seeing, the Attorney General trying to make sure that the right thing is done.
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, this is what I expected. And, initially I said nothing short of a constitutional overhaul would actually grant local governments financial autonomy, because any which way we see it, those loopholes exist that enable the state governments take advantage and still, whether you call it local government autonomy or not, still supervise the local government's funds. So now the state's, the nation's law officer is actually trying to find a way to ensure that legitimately the funds find their way directly to the local governments. But I guess it's going to be a bit of a complex process because, like you said, the complexities do exist in the Constitution that actually hinder the smooth transition of local governments into financial autonomy. So what I'm wondering is how the state governments will be able to deal with this situation when, it finally comes to fruition. But I actually look forward to that happening.
I mean, Yolanda, this will take time. But the other question also arises, when they achieve this financial autonomy at the local government level, what do you do with that money? Accountability and transparency will also be critical here, won't it?
Yes, accountability is always important. But I also have one question concerning this. What was done in the past? What was happening previous to this new, to this new change?
Well, what was happening, sorry,
go ahead,
Dr.
please,
Constance, what was happening was that the local governments were receiving the funds through the state governments.
I see.
Now, the state governments would hold on to the funds and then disburse what they wanted to the local governments, and then compel the local government chairman to sign the spreadsheet saying that, okay, this and this is what we've received. So, yes, the signatures belong to the state the local government chairman, but it was the state governors who were actually determining what local governments were doing with their funds.
Right.
And that is why, the issue of a local government autonomy was simply on paper. Now they want to make it a reality.
I think that matter has not been finally, cleared, because what the federal government is doing through the Office of the Attorney General is to justify why they have not been able to explain that. But I think there's ongoing conversation between the Governors Forum and the President over the matter. Because one thing that is very dear to the governors is the local government structures. Because they believe that...
it is dear to them?
Very dear
How?
to them.
Very dear to them.
In what sense?
Because one, they believe that local government ought to be under the supervision of the state, not the federal government.
Okay.
And
Yes.
two, the source of funds, most of them also use local government fund as a conduit pipe for their selfish interest.
Interesting.
So
I
it's
think
not dear
that's
to them. It's just that they are misusing the power they have.
Well, when I say dear to them,
That is why Dr. Wujere said dear to them, because it is what actually
and one thing that we must also not run away from, whether we like it or not, there's still constitutional provisions that says that the local government and state government must have a joint account.
Right.
It's a constitutional matter, so you cannot wish that away by mere pronouncement by the federal government. especially when the Supreme Court did not even resolve that issue. So until that matter is constitutionally resolved by the National Assembly and two-thirds of the State House of Assembly, it will be very difficult, absolutely very difficult for you to talk about autonomy of the federal, of the local government. It's going to be very difficult. And
that's why the Accountant General talked about complexities.
Yes, exactly.
Which is what they are trying to work
resolve.
out.
But the Attorney General cannot resolve that by mere pronouncement. It needs to go back to the National Assembly and the State House of Assembly to correct our constitutional issues.
All right, let's look at other papers. Leadership newspaper this morning. Labour fumes over telecom electricity tariff hikes. They are still on that and not given way. Then we see Google to pay 2.5 billion rand to South African media. Let's also see what else do we have here. New Telegraph. It's also about NLC threatens nationwide protests over electricity telecoms tariff hike. We also have the Natasha story here. Then at the bottom, why my government couldn't implement 2014 Confab report, according to Jonathan. Then onto the international headlines. Daily Graphic from Ghana. Sophia Akufo questions policy on Ghana's extractive agreements. Akufo is a former Chief Justice in Ghana, and her argument here is that Ghana is overly exploited and that recent extractive agreements are unfavorable and therefore should be re-examined. She further asked whether Ghana still lives in the era of Guggisberg to allow itself to be treated so unfavorably. Of course, Gordon Guggisberg was a senior Canadian-born British Army officer and British Empire colonial administrator. Yolanda, very pertinent question here. Why do African countries still behave as if they are under colonial rule? Or are they indirectly still under colonial rule?
Yes, we indeed are indirectly under, in fact, directly and indirectly. And this comes at a really good time, considering, all the conversations that are going around with Ukraine. It makes you think of your own local issues. So I think this is a very, very nice headline, very timely. It's time for us to take a look at the rules that govern our natural resources, our minerals, because Africa, the truth is, not just Ghana, but Africa holds a large percentage of the natural resources that are on the natural minerals that are on this earth. And I love it. I'm happy that we're looking at it. I'm happy that we're having these kind of conversations. And indeed, it is very timely. Like I said, the Ukraine issue has probably let a lot of people just sit down to think of their own national situations.
And the latest conversation is about actually establishing factories rather than shipping out raw materials out of the continent. Well, it's left for the African governments to make sure that, they are able to negotiate in a way that benefits their population.
Absolutely.
On to Citizen newspaper. On the front page there we have a story about America. See, Senor Trump. It's about Trump's executive order designating English as the official language of the U.S. This now revokes a policy by former President Bill Clinton requiring agencies to provide assistance to people with limited English proficiency. Mind you, more than 40 million people speak Spanish in America. Yolanda, again, do you think this will promote the unity and cultivate a shared American culture, which is what this executive order intends?
Charles and I were briefly speaking about this earlier, and I don't know what to say. It's a little bit disheartening because it seems like Trump is making enemies left, right, and center. I don't know why this would come up at this point in time when so many critical things are happening in the world, but I don't know. Charles, it seems like you wanted to say something concerning that.
I actually did pose that question back then, even though it was rhetorical. How would this make America great again? Because the previous arrangement recognized America's linguistic and cultural diversity.
Absolutely.
Now he wants to make America great again by making America a strictly English-speaking country. And those other organizations have a choice whether or not to translate whatever is done in English to maybe Spanish and those other languages that may be spoken in the United States. So yes, it's a very big question. I wonder what is going on in Donald Trump's mind when he signs executive orders like this.
All right. Well, let's look at our final story here. Daily Mirror. United Front for Ukraine. King offers Zelensky royal show of support. Hand of friendship. you know, that was Volodymyr Zelensky meeting with King Charles over the weekend after that very tense encounter with President Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance at the White House. He needed this badly, Dr. Wogaren, doesn't he?
Absolutely, especially after that terrible,
Yes.
you know, meeting among the Donald Trump, his vice, and Ukrainian president, where they were trying to bully him. And thereafter, you saw the solidarity from different head of states from around the world, you know, trying to say, look, we are with you. And the meeting with the Royal Palace yesterday was also a boost as far as I am concerned. I think what the US and Europe are saying entirely is that whatever peace agreement that they want to reach, Ukraine must be on the table for them to be able to achieve that. It's not something that Donald Trump would dictate with his friends, the Russian president. If you want to have a lasting peace in that territory, Ukraine must also be at the table where those issues will be discussed. So it's going to be a global thing. And right. I'm happy the solidarity they are receiving from the Europe, especially from the UK. Right. Just yesterday, the Prime Minister announced that about 1.2 billion pounds, you know, will be given to Ukraine as a form of assistance, you know.
Okay.
You know.
We're almost out of time, but you also know that Trump is right when he told Zelensky that he has very little cards to play with. And when you listen to what the Prime Minister of Italy said, Giorgia Meloni, she did say that at the end of the day, they still need the US involved in whatever agreement that is reached.
There
is no way that
There's no
Zelensky can win this war. There is no way Europe can win this war. So, I mean, it's a problem they have to solve. And at the end of the day, we'll see how that goes. We'll have to leave it there. Dr. Iyobosa Owoghiaren, editor, Nation's Capital of This Day newspaper. Thank you for coming this morning.
Thank you very much.